and welcome to It's Our Time with Scott Ryan. If I'm anything, I'm right here in 2026, so you'll love these references. Remember when Johnny Carson took a vacation and Dick Cavett or Burt Reynolds came in to fill in for him? My references are top knowledge, aren't they? Huh? That's what's going on here. I am in Twin Peaks. So today, I have a guest host, Courtenay Stallings, fills in for the Johnny Carson of Twin Peaks to welcome Dr. John Dunne and Dr. Kris Song, who's written a new book called Theology and Religion in Twin Peaks. And, you know, the only religion I know is the Mouse and Tigers, but Twin Peaks might as well be one. So we have Courtenay stepping in to talk about this new book. Enjoy this interview. Make sure you pick it up. And also be sure you get my new book, Twin Peaks Through the Red Curtain, which has interviews with over 60 Twin Peaks cast members. I've been out here working at the Double R Diner for the last 6 weeks, and keep it 6 days, it just felt like 6 weeks. I mean, I'm old, and they had a bunch of 18-year-olds working my job. It was bold. I'm cutting together a documentary, so make sure you subscribe to the Blue Rose so you can see it. It's going to be a lot of fun, and enjoy Courtenay talking about religion in Twin Peaks.
Welcome to this podcast where we're going to talk with Dr. John Dunne and Dr. Kris Song about their new book, and we are really excited to have them here. I read the book, and I've got to say, I think it's a book that will really well in academic situations, particularly if you're interested in religion and spirituality and issues of time and memory. And the way that different Eastern religions also factor into Twin Peaks. So I've got with me Dr. John Dunne, Dr. Kris Song. Before we get started on the book and like talking about the background of the book, I would love for you both to introduce yourselves, say a little bit about who you are and where you work and what you do. John, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I'm John Dunn. I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota now. I teach at a seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota called Bethel Seminary. My title is Associate Professor of New Testament, so I'm a Bible scholar, huge fan of all things David Lynch and Twin Peaks, and have really enjoyed being able to kind of bring these loves together.
Great. And Dr. Kris Song, how about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Chris. I'm out here in Southern California. John and I, we connected when we were at seminary at Talbot out here in Southern California. I will still check in with John. We do a bunch of things together, but it's really a testament to the show that this book sort of represents. My favorite thing about Twin Peaks is the community that it creates. And John and I, we were acquaintances, but we really became friends once we started talking about Twin Peaks and our mutual love of that show. And that book sort of is a symbol of that for sure.
Definitely.
Well, so that's something before we dive into the book and I introduce the book, I want to talk about how you both came to Twin Peaks, because I agree it's an academic enterprise for me, but it's also part of that community as well and that history of watching it. So let's start with you, John. How did you come to Twin Peaks? When did you watch it? How did you come to it?
Yeah, so I first got into it in like 2014 or so. I think I was a part of that batch of people that probably got introduced to it on Netflix, and didn't watch it when it first came out. I mean, I was a child, so right? So I couldn't have watched it in 90 and 91 and all this. And even if I was like interested, I wouldn't have been allowed to watch it, right? But I have become a fan. And what happened was I was living in Scotland. I was doing my PhD at the University of St. Andrews, and I was a big fan of Lost. Lost had kind of, just sort of wrapped up, and I was starting my doctoral program, and I was telling this guy in my accommodation at one of our meals, that I was just this huge fan of Lost, and he was like, "Oh, I never got into it because it just felt like a ripoff of Twin Peaks," and I was like, "What is Twin Peaks?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he was this Twin Peaks evangelist and got all these people in our accommodation to watch seasons 1 and 2 up through the reveal of Leland Palmer being the murderer. And they had this huge like conference where they all dressed up and gave presentations like in the common room. And I wasn't a part of any of this. I just knew that it was going on. I don't like spoilers, so I just sort of like, kept my distance, and I was like, oh, I'm too busy anyways. But it just, it kind of got stuck in my mind. And then once I saw it on Netflix, I was like, all right, I got to give this a try. And loved seasons 1 and 2, was weirded out by Fire Walk with Me. But then once I heard that there was going to be a new season, revisited Twin Peaks and revisited Fire Walk with Me. And in hindsight of the return, I now think Fire Walk with Me is wonderful. But at the time, it just felt like it lacked all the quirk and charm that I loved about, especially season 2, but even in season 1. And I felt like they had shifted hard away from that. But now I think Firewalk with Me is brilliant, and yeah, that's really where it all started with me. Kind of hearing about it randomly, and then because of Netflix, being able to dig in.
I love that. And I love that you came to it through Lost as well, which is another one of my favorite shows, which
Yeah,
does riff on Twin Peaks. Sometimes there's direct references to it. And your journey to with Fire Walk with Me is very similar to how people originally
yeah,
accepted or rejected it. Was it was so different from the show, the original series, that some people it was off-putting. So it's
mhm,
interesting to go back and watch it, in hindsight, especially after the return as well. So I
mhm,
love that perspective of you with this.
mhm.
Kris, I would love to see
Yeah.
how you came to Twin Peaks.
Yeah, well, I'm a little bit older than John, and so I did watch the original run when it was going. And I was one of the people that, and I was younger, like this is like probably my freshman year in high school. Um, but I was one of the people that gave up on the show in season 2, and just had forgotten about the show. I didn't even watch the finale at that time when it was going through, and there was that groundswell to bring the show back. Um, that's my recollection of it, and since at that point I was not in the, you know, the sort of the fandom at that point. I wasn't, reading Blue Rose magazine or or any of the things that John Thorne had been doing. All of that came much later. So, this is now post law school, revisiting old shows. And then I remember this was still when Netflix had physical DVDs. I went back and said, I need to give season 2, I need to, give season 2 a proper rewatch. And so starting from season 1, and I definitely remember just falling in love with the show, so like thoroughly in that rewatch, going through those DVDs. Um, and just from the very beginning, that pilot was so amazing. It was so exceptional. And then making peace with season 2. I mean, as crazy as season 2 is, and it does get ridiculous. I mean, Wyndham Earl's in costume, and you've got, Billy Zane making an appearance. I mean, it's wacky. Diane Keaton's directing
Yeah,
episodes. Um, but you learn to love its faults, its glaring faults as well. And but the second time through was when I really started connecting with the fandom, the literature about Twin Peaks. And it's such a rich fandom. I mean, in my experience, there's nothing like it. I mean, Stranger Things just wrapped, and I had a lot of fun sort of going through all the fan theories and reels, but the the sophistication and passion that Twin Peaks fans have is unmatched. And so
yeah,
getting to know people through that, getting to interact with fans and scholars of the show, it's been so rewarding. And obviously the return, when it happened, in real time, going, being an online active fan interacting with fans during the return. That was such a gift. It's such a
Yeah.
memorable time, and it's still going on. People are sort of engaging it for the first time, and it's just this gift that keeps giving.
Yeah, one of the things about the return, like, as you were talking about it, is that connection on social media that we didn't have. I watched the original series too when it first aired, and I was young, but we didn't have the social media aspect that we had with the
Right.
return. And that was so special and so amazing to build on that connection. And I work with a lot of college students, and it's really fun to see them get into Twin Peaks or David Lynch and Mark Frost and see a whole younger generation come to it and get just as excited as I was and am. And that's really heartening, actually.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about your book, Theology, Religion, and Twin Peaks. And I'm going to provide a synopsis for the readers or the watchers, I guess I should say. So, like the series Trademark Pie, John Anthony Dunne and Kris Song's exploration into David Lynch's Twin Peaks leaves you hungry for more. This volume investigates the religious, theological, spiritual, and supernatural elements across the series' two original seasons and the film Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, and its third and final season, often referred to as The Return. Zooming in on iconic aspects like the Log Lady, the Red Room, and Laura Palmer's catalyzing murder, the contributors present fresh, thought provoking insights into the oft discussed cult classic. This volume's subjects, like Twin Peaks itself, frustrates and compels at the same time, inviting deeper exploration into the series' religious and theological significance. And I really love this idea of bringing in religion and different aspects of religion too. Christianity plays a role, as does many of Eastern religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, and also looking at the supernatural. And Kris, you talk about the Stoicism too, which I think is like fascinating in your chapter. How did this book come about? It's a part of the series Theology, Religion, and Pop Culture. I'm so curious, like, what was the impetus for this book? How did it come together? How did you choose the authors? If one or both of you want to start with that.
Well, so we had done a book in the series already on Black Mirror, and had just a really great experience with it. I co-edited it with another one of our. So Kris and I have a podcast together called The Two Cities, and another one of our podcast team members co-edited it with me. Her name's Amber Bowen. She's a philosopher, and Kris contributed to that volume, and I had such a great experience with it. It was like, oh yeah, I would love to do another one. And like Twin Peaks is one of those shows. And Kris and I, because of our love of Twin Peaks, I mean, we're just always talking Twin Peaks when we're when we're
Yep.
when we're around each other. We're just talking Twin Peaks. And so, and we had done a couple of Twin Peaks episodes on our podcast, and it was like, oh yeah, we should totally try to recruit some people to be a part of this. And Kris could fill out more of those details, but we had just done a broad sort of call for papers. We had met and kind of thought about what would be the kinds of issues we would love to see represented in a volume like this. And so we had dreamt up a handful of possible things that could be addressed, and then had the joy of seeing submissions come in and proposals, and then yeah, sifting through those, and it was just a really really great experience, a good breadth of contributions from different people focused on different aspects, and yeah, just really enjoyed the process.
Yeah, I'll only add that I mean there's so many entry points to get into a Twin Peaks, but both Lynch and Frost have Christian backgrounds, but they're both steeped in Eastern meditative practices. Um, Mark Frost has an extensive and pretty public relationship with um, some of the theosophical writings, and Blavatsky, and that makes its way into the show as well. So there's so much here to explore, um, and we were thrilled as the as the contributions. Whenever you put out a call, you're a little nervous about the quality and the interest, but we were really thrilled about some of the the contributions that were coming in.
Mhm.
Um, and we could talk about this later, but one of the things uh, that I was really thrilled about including in this volume was the chapter by David Foster Wallace. This is among fans of the show. It's sort of revered as sort of this great piece of writing on the show. And John and I would sort of quote from it to each other in messages because it's just hysterical. But he has a long section on evil in Lynch's sort of film work and television, and I just thought it would be a really great addition to the volume. And so I was thrilled when the Foster Wallace Trust allowed us to put in our own version of that essay in the book. Um, John and I call it sort of a critical annotated version because there's different versions of that essay floating around. There's an internet version that was based on the version from Premiere Magazine. Um, the publisher had their own version that they put in a collected volume of works. And so we were able to sort of piece together an annotated critical volume or edition of that. And really proud of that one as we are of a lot of the essays that are in that work.
I think that's an excellent inclusion, and it stopped me in my tracks actually when I was
Mm.
reading the book and I was looking at the contributors in the different chapters, and I said, wait a
Yeah.
second. And I love that you had gotten permission to use this specific version of the essay and included his voice in there. His voice is who has been gone for so long, but like you said, has been revered by the Twin Peaks community and others. And it was fascinating to see his work in there. And also, I really appreciated because academic work sometimes can be take itself so seriously.
Hmm.
I love seeing Philip Jeffries as a contributor in there too.
So glad you appreciate that.
I
Yeah.
really did. I ran to that chapter and I was like, oh yes, of course. This chapter, I won't give any spoilers away so people can get the book and read it, but it is very fitting for Philip Jeffries' chapter. So I'm glad he was included.
Oh, cheers.
He is outside of space and time and of course an intellectual himself.
Yeah.
Love that. Love
Oh,
that.
Yeah.
that was a long running idea from before submissions ever came in. It was something Chris and I would just absolutely die laughing about. And it was so funny because we just kept running with it like we are doing this and then had like hilarious interactions with our publisher about like, wait, what is this? Why is this here? Do we need to add like all these caveats? And we're like, no, just trust us. The Twin Peaks
I,
fans will appreciate it.
no, and that's one of the things I love because academia and publishing takes itself very seriously as somebody who's like been on the editorial side, but also on the writing side, and having to make these arguments and say, no, you don't understand. This will be very much appreciated. I really did love that too. It's kind of a nice like pause in
Yep. Yes.
the more serious works. They're addressing kind of some serious
Yes.
issues too.
Yes. Yes.
Um, so the introduction does a great overview of, what the book is trying to do, and what it's trying to do regarding all these different aspects of religion. And one of the things I really appreciate that you both do in the introduction is this great overview of the book, but also you mentioned Mark Frost earlier, you point out Mark Frost is a huge contributor to Twin Peaks. He's often left out in these discussions. And I
Hmm.
say this as a big David Lynch fan, but
Yeah. Right.
he is a very important part of Twin Peaks, creating it and then writing it and a showrunner. But you also mentioned the importance of spirituality and religion and his study of religions, because I think he's often left. We always talk about David Lynch, and especially because there's so much of transcendental meditation and so much of his study of Eastern religions and the Vedic and all of these things that make its way into his work. And so I want to talk a little bit about that too, about the importance of including Mark Frost in this discussion.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was something that going in we wanted to highlight, and we actually told all of our contributors that we wanted them to pay attention to Frost and what he's done with the secret files, um, and even investigating this further myself. I was really pleased to see sort of the stereotypes, like that Lynch is sort of this grounded, like, crime procedural television show writing veteran, and Lynch was sort of
Frost,
the
you mean? Yeah.
visionary. I mean,
Yeah.
Frost,
Yeah.
and then Lynch is sort of just the artsy visionary. And that was how the combination worked, and that really wasn't the case at all. A lot of the spiritual, mystical, and even mysterious elements of the show are directly attributable to Mark Frost, almost entirely. So I just loved. I love the partnership that Frost and Lynch were able to have together. Um, it's almost, I liken it to improv comedy in the sense that they never really questioned some of the ideas as far off as they just sort of accepted um, what was coming through. And in a famous story, Mark Frost was working on the script, and Lynch gives him a call late into the night, and literally the call is, Josie's supposed to be in the doorknob of the dresser. And instead of saying, why don't we sleep on this? Or instead of saying, I'm not sure this is the way to go, Frost unquestioningly puts it into the story, which is just bold, but it speaks volume into the trust that they had in each other, and just how wonderfully that partnership. It wasn't always smooth. I've come to learn, but they really found their voice together, and so that work of theirs together, I think, is one of my favorite things about the show, actually.
Yeah, and there, there has been the rumblings of, the difficulties, and I'm sure in working, such a close working relationship of any two people, we would probably have that on a show like that. But it's interesting. Mark Frost has really, especially since David Lynch's passing, has had
Mhm.
nothing but positive,
Right.
wonderful things to say, and you could tell there was a mutual respect, even if they didn't always agree
Right.
on it, and an openness too. I think that openness to creativity. Um, I really appreciate you just off the bat really talking about Mark Frost and his contribution and how important it is. Um, and the arrangement of your book too, because I was thinking about how like this is such a big undertaking
Yeah.
in getting these collaborations and getting these ideas and getting these topics. And it looks like you talk about this tripartite structure. The first part is concerned with spiritual quest for truth, meaning with the broader universe. The second part is evil and human agency, which I really love. And then concluding, you really talk about time endings and eschatology. Did this structure really come about? Like, were you thinking of the structure before you had a call for papers, or did the papers kind of like the essays that came in kind of dictate what the structure would be?
I would say it was a bit of both. I think we probably always knew that there would be a section on evil, and that would be a huge part of this. And so that one, um, yeah, was kind of a no-brainer. And I think we also realized like, oh yeah, we should title these parts with like very Twin Peaks centric, titles. So that section on evil is called The Gifted and the Damned, and the section on the quest for meaning is The Search for the Zone, which Kris definitely titled, and then Through the Darkness of Future Past as that beautiful kind of time based line for the final section. Yeah, and there definitely was a bit of like we'll see what we get and kind of create a structure around that at the same time. And so because we had so many time oriented essays, we knew like yeah, these should go together, and definitely started to kind of crystallize as we started to discuss like what's a good order, what's a good way to imagine like somebody if they're going to read through this, as opposed to pick a couple of essays that they would really like to read, which of course is a great way to read an anthology, a collection of essays. We were really kind of being mindful of like, oh yeah, this is a good kind of like progression of thought. It's one of the reasons why, as you mentioned, the Jeffries piece provides a nice kind of pause, because as much as it is a kind of fun, sort of playful thing for Kris and I to do, it also is a kind of statement about evil at the same time before sort of moving on into the next section. And so yeah, we were definitely sort of going with what we got and sort of had some idea going into it.
Yeah, I was very curious about that because it seems like such a big undertaking to have these big ideas, have these big topics that you want covered, and then you also have to get, what people are wanting to write about that fits into that. And
Yes.
figuring out how I was thinking as an editor, it'd be so interesting to like figure, problem solving to figure out where to put all those things. I love the way that it's organized too,
Mm.
and I think you're right. I think you could go to individual essays if you want, but you could also look at these bigger themes and like read them sort of in chunks too, and kind of think about how they all interact with each other. So
Mhm.
I really appreciate how that's organized. Um, One of the things I want to talk about too is, your book begins and ends with you both. And I think
Mm.
that it's a really great bookend of your essays. And so I wanted to talk to both of you about the essays that you have. John, you have, the first essay, and it's titled My Log is Turning Gold, The Religions in and of Twin Peaks. And it does a great job of kind of like the introduction of like setting the stage for the rest of the book about these are the religions that appear. And it may be religions that you weren't even aware. That's what's so fascinating as, a layperson who is not a religious studies, academic, to kind of see like, oh, these are the different ways that the religions appear, how we can read into, maybe they were influenced or directly mentioned or referred to, referenced. So can you talk a little bit about writing that chapter? Like, what was your impetus for writing the chapter?
Yeah.
And the placement of it at the beginning of the book, too, the beginning of the essays.
Totally. So there's definitely a backstory here because this was originally going to be part of the introduction, and the way Kris and I decided to write the introduction was we kind of had our respective sections that we wanted to really kind of focus on, and then we'd come together and edit it together and do some crafting together, but sort of do the heavy lifting for each section kind of individually. And so I was working on, kind of like where we see religious imagery throughout the show, just kind of like cataloging, organizing all of that. And when I uploaded that to the document, I don't remember exactly what Kris said, but he was just like, man, there is a lot here. This needs to be its own essay. And I was like, oh, what? Really? I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. But he was like, yeah, no, dude, this needs to be its own thing. And I was like, okay, all right, now I need to think of this differently than I have been, as opposed to a section within an introduction. Now I need to think about sort of organizing it around a particular sort of claim about what Twin Peaks is doing with all this religious imagery. And so I appreciated Kris's prodding because I was content with putting it in the introduction, but yeah, Kris was like, no, this is. This is not a part of an introduction. This is an essay. So yeah, with that one, my sort of the way I sort of was cataloging it, I noticed, of course, you've got the kind of if you like, nominal Christian characters. There's a handful of them, and then you've got a handful of like fairly religious or religiously coded or like religiously developed characters. You've got characters like Annie Blackburn and Major Garland Briggs. You've got even Agent Cooper. And you've got Hawk and these characters that are more religiously developed. But the way that Twin Peaks sort of handles religion, of course, it's very post-Christian, right? It's not distinctly sort of utilizing the Christian tradition. It's very much a bricolage. It's drawing eclectically from various religious traditions, but it's also contributing its own kind of like spirituality, its own mythology, and that mythology is all very religiously coded, right? So you have these kind of otherworldly supernatural characters, you have supernatural sacred spaces, you have kind of like these kind of like quasi-religious rituals and these different sorts of things. So there's this kind of bricolage of various religious imagery to kind of create a new whole with its own sort of like mythological contribution at the same time. And so I like to think of the religions in and of Twin Peaks. And that's kind of how I sort of outline that. And not just kind of like looking at the different kind of religious images, the religious characters, religious imagery, kind of allusions to biblical texts and things like that, but also kind of the spiritual journeys that are on display in this show, right? So thinking of like the return, the way that like Laura in the red room pulls her face off and there's this like bright white light sort of like perhaps representing some kind of wholeness and spiritual kind of like arrival in contrast to her mother when her mother takes her face off at the bar and there's this darkness, but it's not, there's not just the darkness, there is this kind of hand that emerges with a dark spiritual mound finger, right? Which is something from earlier in the show when Dirty Dale, Mr. C, right, says it's Arab, very good to see you or whatever. And on the plane when Gordon is talking to Tammy and he like presses each of her fingers and he says, "That's the spiritual mound. You think about that, Tammy." And like and that whole business about like this like spiritual this finger that represents this kind of deeper inner spirituality. This is how he knows that that's not a good Dale there. And then when we see this hand emerge from this kind of dark interiority that Sarah Palmer reveals, and that she's been so traumatically devastated by everything and possibly even that frog moth thing, however you interpret the end of part eight, right? And so you have all this traumatic stuff contributing to her, and so this kind of like spiritual dynamic there. But you also have these characters like Bobby and Ben, who by the time we see them in the return, we see that they have been on a sort of path of spiritual development. Bobby, of course, now works for the sheriff's department, but then with Ben, he's not the same person. And we see that at the end of season two, there's that great scene where he's got all these religious texts and he's like trying to glean as much wisdom as he can from all of them, and he enumerates which ones he's holding, right? All these like sacred texts and religious texts, and it seems like he has continued on this like path of like spiritual refinement, and then that spiritual refinement syncs up really well with alchemical imagery, where the process of the alchemical sort of work is to take base metals and turn it into gold. And Nadine's gold shovel, her journey has sort of culminated. She's got this gold shovel. She can dig herself out of the shit, right? And then in that same chapter, or that same episode, that same part, I should say, that's when Margaret Landerman says, "My log is turning gold," right? This is the same sort of like end of her alchemical work as well. So I think there's a lot of really interesting spiritual imagery and religious imagery and mythological imagery that's just all kind of pulled together in Twin Peaks. And so that chapter is really kind of a curated sort of assembly, just like the show is itself a bricolage, kind of doing a bit of that and highlighting that to kick off the book.
Well, I think Kris was right. I think this is great as its own chapter. Like I think the introduction does what the introduction should do, and this is I really found it helpful to kind of broaden my mind. Sometimes I get stuck on like, okay, the Buddhist or Hindu tradition, and I forget about like there's Christianity elements, and I say this as a Christian too, oh yes, of course. And there's like other spiritual elements and of course the supernatural. And so I think your chapter does a really good job of setting that up, particularly before we get into the other essays. One of the things I just wanted to quote you from your chapter is you talk about, these different traditions and different religions and mythology and spirituality. And you write, the effect of this amalgamation of traditional patterns with supernatural lore is to fragilize our preconceived notions of the world. To borrow and adapt Charles Taylor's terminology, whether we come from a traditional religious or secular perspective, and also to enchant us viewers of this ostensible murder mystery with that of the greatest mysteries of the universe and of life itself. And I love that. It's, whether we come or are part of a religious tradition, or even if we're not, this is, there's a powerful thing that you all are doing in these essays of another way to view this work of art, this TV show, this movie, um, The Return as a film, however you want to view it. And so I think that's a great sort of overview before you kind of jump into the individual essays of like keeping that in mind.
Mm. Well, thank you for that. And I just want to add that, that little bit about mystery and mystery, this is something that Kris and I have been talking about for years, is because of our mutual love of Lost, and we are working on a book on Lost as well at the moment in the same series. But, what Lost also does very similarly is presents you with mysteries, and you just realize there's a capital M mystery that both are really kind of pointing to, and ostensibly you think, oh yeah, this is a detective show. You're trying to uncover this mystery of who killed Laura Palmer, and it's just no, there is a capital M mystery behind all of this, and you don't expect to get into all of that when you first sit down to watch, this show, especially probably when it first came out, right? I think a lot of fans were like, "What are we getting ourselves into?" But that's just something that Kris and I always were talking about. Is just, yeah, this show is it's using mystery to talk about capital M mystery.
Yeah. Yeah. And you, yeah, I really, I think that's fascinating because in sort of a largely secular world now too, that can mean different things to different people about this, that sort of search for meaning, that search for a higher power or something else beyond ourselves. And that's why it can have such broad appeal too, that it's this amalgamation of different spiritualities and religions, and in a murder mystery, like you said, but like that is like the inroad to something. I think that's that larger appeal is that big, big, uppercase M mystery.
Mm.
I love that. Kris, I
Yeah,
want to
I
talk.
would just like to.
Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to
Okay.
talk over. I just needed to jump in really quick because I mean, I think what I'm proud of, not just with John's essays, but the rest of the essays that follow, is this real carefulness not to talk about what Twin Peaks is about or
Mm,
what religion unlocks in the show. Um, you know, you know, Dale Cooper famously says in season one, "Our job is simple: break the code, solve the crime." And you know, you realize very quickly that that can't be true. And
Mm.
even if the execs want to reveal who killed Laura Palmer, um, you realize that just peels another layer of mystery behind it. And so, there's no simple answers, especially when it comes to the question of evil, like the devil made me do it. Well, really, let's talk about this. And the answers are never quite simple. And it's one thing that I really appreciate about the show. Their handling of religion is not it's not a way to talk about what the show is about. Even though they handle the material pretty accurately. So, for instance, the demonology, when we talk about
Mm.
Bob, um, it follows pretty biblical patterns, as a lot of movies about evil spirits do. There's this requirement of invitation.
Mm.
So Leland talks about, I invited him in.
Mm.
it's taking sort of the mythology on its own terms, but not being constrained by it, and
Mm,
still sort of moving with the material in the way that Lynch and Frost typically do. Um,
mm. Sinners is a great
yeah,
iteration
I was
of that.
thinking about Sinners right there. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, and I think there's enough like you said, there's not a lot of discussion from the creators about what this is or what this means, and it leaves space, especially for us who like to interpret or who like to explore the themes, and it leaves us room to it's open for interpretation, and I really appreciate that aspect. As somebody who loves to write and think about the show, I do really appreciate that part of it too. Um, so Kris, your essay is the other part of the sort of bookend, the last essay in the book, and your essay is titled "The Past Dictates the Future: Biblical Repetition, Stoic Recurrence, and the Circularity of Time in Twin Peaks." And I love this, particularly in this part of the book, this last part, this exploration of memory and time um, that Twin Peaks does, but also some of the themes that you're doing in your essay and others are talking about. Do you want to talk about that chapter?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the things that I like to identify patterns in a show like Twin Peaks, and Twin Peaks is just from beginning to end a series of loops and recurrences down to the very end of what years it and it's amazing every time you rewatch it, you see something new or you learn something new. This last rewatch that I did as we were going through the book, um, for all the people that are annoyed at how long Dougie's character takes in the return, you realize you've seen that before, and you see Nadine going through a period where she reverts to a younger version of herself, or Benjamin Horne, becomes a
Mm,
Civil War general for you see um, these ways that characters sort of go into sort of a childlike version of themselves, the way that Dougie is. Um, Obviously, most famously. Dale's sort of obsession with the Laura Palmer murder is echoed in his own life with Caroline Earle, with Annie Blackburn, um, and of course Laura's own death is reprised in Maddie Ferguson's uh, case, and so you just see echoes upon echoes of each other where at some point you do lose grasp of intentionally you do lose grasp of the realities of is it future or is it past, that past, present, and future continue not only to repeat themselves, but in ways that become the mystery itself is what do we do when we're confronted with this. And so these are things that I see a lot of similarity of wrestling with. The Stoics have this version of the circularity of time, not just like in a Groundhog Day where you relive the same day over and over again, but the Stoics' version of recurrence is very robust, where we've lived this life before many, many times, impossible to count, but it's not just similar lives, it's the same life. So
mm,
like the past versions of me have had a freckle right here, that's
mm.
not just an inch away, it's the same place. And so thorough is their version of recurrence. And in Nietzsche's book, Also Sprachler, the Zarathustra book, I can never pronounce that right. Um, his character, when confronted with the idea of Stoic recurrences, this is the most sublime thing I've ever heard. So he takes this idea of past and future continuing the same pattern as his own sort of sense of salvation, not as something to despair or mourn over. Um, the biblical the Bible itself is also very fond of pattern repetition. So you see the flood narrative repeated, not just in Noah, but also in Moses' story, and then in Jesus' story, and his flight to Egypt. You see a lot of recurrences of the Adam and Eve narrative that get sort of sprinkled throughout the founding stories through the prophets and into Jesus. And so you see from beginning to end, Genesis and Revelation ending with the Garden of Eden, the same grappling with the idea of circularity, but coming, of course, to different conclusions about it. And so, this essay was just an attempt to sort of not, not talk about, well, this is what David Lynch and Mark Frost intended. This is what they were doing, but just sort of seeing their different grapplings with time repeating, and with history repeating, and how we choose then to live in the face of it. Um, and this to me is, I will always reject any kind of fan theory that says, this is what Twin Peaks is about. This is the one key that unlocks it. But one thing that I can confidently say, that both Frost and Lynch cared about and really tried to communicate in the show is the decency of human beings, and the importance of acting with goodness and decency, and that gets reflected in several characters. Um, uh, Harry Dean Stanton's character, um, Bush Mullen's character. There's some genuine examples of real goodness, and I know that were very important to both of them, and it's another reason I love the show so much.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, I agree. I think that there is a pessimism that can run through Twin Peaks too about humanity, but I think there is that other side of it too, that optimism about there is goodness in the world, and here's some examples of good people
Yeah.
doing good things. One of the things that stood out to me there's several things that stood out to me about your chapter. But one that it just made me go, I need to pay attention to this, is you write most characters face dark endings in Twin Peaks. When asked about this, Mark Frost explained, I would characterize it as realistic. Not everyone gets a happy ending. In fact, most people don't. That's what I was trying to convey. Because there's been so much talk about like what is the end of Twin Peaks of Return? Like, what is it trying to convey? And I wrote this piece about like kind of wrestling with like the happy ending that takes place in part 17, and then like the realistic ending that, which
Mm.
I don't think is necessarily a pessimistic ending. But is that something that you all were wrestling with too, is like, or trying to explore is, what about the ultimate end, or is there an end to Twin Peaks? Is it this kind of reoccurring loop that, Cooper's in? And how are you wrestling with that in terms of religion and theology and spirituality endings?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's still something that we talk about, even now. We're talking about it right now. The uh, it's great that you mentioned part 17 and 18, because they really are meant to be watched together, and compared with each other. And it's so rich at how layered these patterns of similarity and difference get. You know, Even Lynch, Lynch has seen some of the fan theories of like playing episodes like superimposed on each other and with surprising results. And I think even Lynch is like, no, I didn't intend that. I mean, I wish I did, but um, and it goes to show just um, how seamlessly they sort of interact with each other. Um, the And you're right. The ending, I think, is like most of David Lynch's work is not sort of a cognitive ending that you sort of arrive at a conclusion, and that's the moral of the story. It for sure is a feel think phenomena where the feeling that you're left with, um, if anything, that's the point. Whether that might be satisfying or dissatisfying, I will never forget how I felt at the very end of watching The Return. Um, and I can tell you for sure, I didn't love it when I first watched it. I was like, "There's no way this is the end. There's no way credits roll." Um, but when I keep reflecting on it. There's something that feels inevitable and right about how the show ends. And I'm a fan of the ending of Twin Peaks. When they were talking about more Twin Peaks or continuing the story, I was like, no, I really think it ends here. I really think this
Yeah.
is the right place to sort of to leave the fandom with sort of this parting image. It's not unsimilar to how I mean, season two ends.
Mm.
Fans hated, I mean, we all love Dale Cooper. Dale Cooper is my favorite character in all
Mm.
of television and film history. You don't want to see Dale, you know, with his toothpaste and you don't want that to be your enduring image of a character you love so much. But you know, there's something Lynchian, there's something very
Mm.
right about the way these things end, not as we would draw them up, and with the feeling that it leaves us with. And it's, I think it's perfect.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I think it's a beautiful ending. I know when I watched it the first time, I was so anxious. I kept looking at my phone to see like how much time, was left, and I was like, no way, no
No
way.
way.
Like there's no way. And then yeah, as soon as, Laura screams and the lights go out, I thought, well, we're getting a season four. Like, I mean, that was just like my immediate sort of
Mm.
reaction. And then through processing it, just thinking, how appropriate to end with Laura screaming outside of the Palmer house as the lights go out. You know what I mean? Like, that's just emotionally, that's a great place to end, even if it's so unsettling as viewers. Um, Although in my other essay, I think that lack of satisfaction pushes me in a different place in terms of, you know, where is the true ending of Twin Peaks? We could go round and round, but I really think it's the end of Fire Walk with Me. And in hindsight, that Dale and Laura there are now ready, I think, to go home in a sense that they weren't when they were Richard and Carrie Page, and I think that's part of the problem. I think something was amiss. It was the right idea, but the wrong place, the wrong people, and I think it's the ending of Fire Walk with Me that is um, the place where we see them united in this very interesting kind of imagery. Dale's hand is on her shoulder, which mirrors the way that the one-armed man puts his hand on Mike, and this kind of reunion of the arm and the one-armed man. I sort of see that as being a kind of important spiritual part of the ending, that they are able to go home now in a perhaps truer sense. And then I use the Gospel of Philip, an extra canonical early Christian Valentinian gospel, to kind of arrive at that sort of a reading as I read the Red Room's functionality in relation to what this text calls the bridal chamber, which is this esoteric reference that could be a ritual, could be a spiritual place, but it seems to sort of represent this relational reunion of the self between a divided self, which is all of us, according to the Gospel of Philip, and our angelic counterparts. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on between Dale and Laura. I mean, Dale is a kind of guardian angel. I mean, literally being there in the woods, overseeing what happens as we learn from part 17. But I think the ending of Fire Walk with Me suggests there is a time where he doesn't intervene. He's got this kind of guardian angel quality too, because earlier in season two, when Audrey is praying to Dale Cooper. There's this kind of guardian angel sort of quality to him, and so I think that that final scene where the angels are present, like literally in the Red Room, I think Dale is one of those angels. I think there's a kind of beauty to that ending, the kind of laugh cry thing that's going on with Laura. She's got the perfect courage that I think Hawk was talking about, when asked about how to get past this sort of realm. And I think they're now ready. I think Dale has learned the lesson of the return at the end of Fire Walk with Me is sort of how I read that. And so obviously, we can go round and round on what the true ending is, but that's where I land in my essay on this topic of time and endings.
And I really love that idea. There's a video circulating on social media from a 1999 interview with David Lynch where the interviewer asked him about angels, and
Hmm.
Lynch is like, "I believe in angels," and the interviewer is thinks he's being ironic or
Yeah.
funny, and he's not. He's being serious, and it's so striking because I think I've heard other people who know Lynch say that people thinks he's being funny and ironic, but he's actually a very earnest, sincere person. And I think in Hollywood, that seems very rare in the world in
Hmm.
general, but in Hollywood. So it made me think too about this idea of angels. And I think Lynch says, like, I don't know if they're the ones with wings or, whatever, but some type of like guardian, like you were talking about, that really exists. And so I was thinking about the ways in which, like, Lynch and Frost too are talking about guardians or angels in this kind of sense. And Twin Peaks. Speaking of angels and endings and all these things, and David Lynch, I was also struck when I was, going through the front matter of your book and seeing that the book was dedicated to David
Hmm.
Lynch. And you mentioned that too, I think in your introduction about how he passed while you all were working on the book, which must have been um, a pretty intense thing. It was an intense moment for a lot of us who were fans of
Hmm.
his, but also in working on a book where you're dedicating so much time and energy to talking about his work and Mark Frost's work. Can you talk a little bit about, like, what it was like to find out the news that he had passed while working on this book?
Yeah, I mean, I still think about that. John and I were just messaging about Lynch this past week. And the loss and absence is still felt like, it would just, and there's now been sort of my social media, especially since like Twin Peaks Day, February the
Hmm.
24th just passed, my social media just gets flooded with a lot of Lynch stuff. But I sit down and watch every single one. He's such an inspiration to creative people, to thoughtful people everywhere. And he just had this unique ability to draw people in, to be open to creativity, to be open to mystery, and to the things that whether from within or from without, is trying to speak. And um, and I have a daughter in college now. She loves David Lynch, precisely because of that, because of his ability to sort of draw people into the creative. And so that loss, is it's still so it's so deep. Um, and I remember being definitely moved, and still feeling that absence now.
Hmm. Yeah, we were in the final stages of putting the book together, and I don't even know if we had talked about who we would dedicate the book to. I don't recall having a conversation prior to that, but as soon as we all got the news, and then Chris and I were chatting about it and processing it, it was like, well, we have to dedicate this book to David Lynch. Um, and it's disappointing, to say the least, because we of course hoped that maybe one day he would hear about the book, and one could hope, anyways. But so we knew at that point that we had to dedicate it to him, and and going back to the other conversation, not to sideline Mark Frost, from this, but just because, Lynch was definitely, huge influences on both Kris and I, and all those contributing. And given the loss, we knew we had to dedicate it to him.
Yeah. It really kind of stopped me in my tracks when I was going through the initial pages and saw that. And then later on in the introduction, when you mentioned that you were writing the book and working on the book during that, I thought that's got to be an intense moment. It was for all of us who have written about his work and Mark Frost's work over the years.
Hmm.
Um, so I'd like to wrap up by, encouraging people to purchase and read Theology, Religion, and Twin Peaks. I would love for you both to say, if you want to promote anything or um, tell us how to follow you on social media. I would love to end with that. So, Kris and John, if you'll say whatever you want to promote and where to follow you on social media.
I'll go first. Courtney, thanks so much. I feel like we just started to scratch the first surface. All three of us, I'm sure, could keep going on about, um, favorite things about Lynch and about Twin Peaks. But this was a great place to start. And I've always I've always felt that Lynch and Twin Peaks is one of the most effective shorthands of finding good people. Like I can't
Hmm.
I've had like maybe three or four conversations with perfect strangers about Twin Peaks or about Lynch, and that connection more than anything else. We like once I find out this person likes the show, it's like, oh, like this guy gets it or this girl gets it, and so it's been a really it's been a great privilege and just a lot of fun to interact with fans of the show. And we hope that this book is just one more piece to that. So thank you for continuing that conversation. John and I do a lot of stuff on the Two Cities podcast. We've done a few episodes on Twin Peaks,
Yep.
and we can encourage folks to check that out. And I'll let John do the rest.
Yeah, and we will do another episode. We have somebody who wants to jump on and talk to us about Twin Peaks, so we'll have that out, probably in a few months. But yeah, so our podcast is The Two Cities. Our website is thetwocities.com. We have a number of other contributors who participate with that. We're both on social media. My handle on Facebook and Instagram is Johnny Pepper 2. That was my nickname back in college and grad school. When I first met Kris. And then on X, I'm at Dr. J.A. Dunne, and Dunne is Dunne. But yeah, always happy to engage over Twin Peaks, as Kris says. Definitely Twin Peaks people are it's the best fandom there is. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm personally involved in a handful of different fandoms, Harry Potter, academic discussions and different things, but there's nothing like Twin Peaks fandom. It's wild and I love it.
I love it too. And I want to thank you both for talking about your book today and your work and just about Twin Peaks. Like I said, I could probably, even if you didn't have a book, I could probably talk to both of you. But I love your book and I love this deep exploration of spirituality and religion and the supernatural. It's a great academic enterprise, but it's also just a great read too for any lay
Mm.
person as well who's interested in taking a deeper dive into some of these philosophies and theories as well. So thank you both for sharing and for writing this book and editing this book. I hope we can catch up again when you write your lost book. I'd love to talk to you
Yes.
then about that. That sounds like fun. I hope you both have the good rest of your day and take care.